I speak to you in the name of the risen one, my Lord and my God. Amen. Every year on the Sunday after Easter Day, churches that follow the Revised Common Lectionary turn to the 20th chapter of John's Gospel and read aloud the passage we have just heard. It is quite likely that this account of doubting Thomas is more familiar to you than any of the particular Easter morning accounts that we hear of. This story, to be sure, is a part of that great tradition that provides evidence of the factual resurrection of Jesus Christ. A moment that Reverend Scott described at the Easter Vigil as a moment that changed everything. And that Easter Vigil, if you were here, you would have sensed what a moment like that can be when that first Easter light was struck, breaking through the darkness of this room. Or perhaps as Scott and I were walking through the aisles and you felt that splash of baptismal water. Those moments that jar us to attention. Sometimes those moments evaporate like those baptismal waters. And Canon Martha spoke last Sunday morning, telling us how little had actually changed on that Easter day. Oh yes, the resurrection had happened, it changes everything, and yet the evidence was so scant. People were going about their daily work. The disciples, the women, were in mourning, were sad and afraid because Jesus had died. And then those post-resurrection encounters for those early witnesses gave them proof that death had been conquered. The reading from John's account of another post-resurrection encounter, that of Thomas, the disciple who missed that first Sunday evening for some reason, is not just to remind us of the resurrection, but I think it is an important piece that can help us with that other part that Martha spoke of last Sunday. We have God's power revealed in the resurrection, but we, followers of Jesus, are given a choice to let the effect of that resurrection permeate our lives. And there is much to be learned from Thomas and from this story that can help us do exactly that. Let the resurrection become real in how we live from day to day, from moment to moment. I would like to begin talking about Thomas first by dismantling this notion about doubting. There is so much more to Thomas. We hear of two other moments in John's Gospel where Thomas speaks up. There is a courageous Thomas who, when Jesus announces that he is going to Bethany because his friend Lazarus has died, Bethany was a dangerous place. They had actually been driven from that town for fear of being stoned. Courageous Thomas says, "Well, let us go with him to Bethany, that we too may die." He was prepared to follow Jesus, even at great risk, at great peril. But he also took risks that you and I know. You've sat in classrooms and we're afraid to ask the question. Jesus, in one moment in John's Gospel, is offering reassurance. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. I am going ahead of you to prepare a place for you. We know those words of comfort from our funeral liturgies. Well, Thomas, after hearing that, says, "We don't even know where you're going. How can we follow you?" Thomas was able to overcome that little fear of seeming unsure, ignorant of what Jesus is talking about. And Jesus graciously helps Thomas to understand. I am sympathetic to Thomas for wanting evidence. I spent years doing research where we pored over the data. We looked carefully at what was before us to try and understand. But when Thomas was asking for proof, he was no more skeptical than any of the other disciples. He was just asking for what they had already received. They had seen Jesus, the resurrected one, seen the wounds in his hands and in his side. Thomas was asking that he might see them as well. And here, I think, is an important message for us in the church, who gather comfortably in churches that are oftentimes built like fortresses. And we safely proclaim our faith as we recite together the creed. Did you note that a week after encountering the risen one, the disciples are once again gathered behind shut doors? Was Thomas's demand for that physical evidence in part because he could not yet see a significant change in the lives of his fellow followers? The resurrection had not yet permeated them. The Spirit that Jesus had breathed upon them had not yet demonstrated the power of the resurrection for those followers of Jesus. Do our lives demonstrate the power of the resurrection? Thomas, this brave one who said, "Let us go and die with him," fell far short of that on Good Friday. He was not hanging on a cross next to Jesus. He was nowhere to be found, just like the other disciples. Thomas, that one who had Jesus explain things to him, still did not understand. But when he encounters the risen one, Jesus is not there wagging his finger and say, "Where were you, O brave one?" He wasn't saying, Yet again, another stupid question, Thomas? No. Jesus came with peace and forgiveness. What a comfort for us who so often can be inspired and have plans for great things and find them not moving beyond the plan. Where we need to hear things again and again before it sinks in and changes us from the inside out. This story offers great hope. But it is not just the story of 2,000 years ago. Look through history, the power of the resurrection. I am sure when the young man George, with a promising military career, was challenged, demanded by Roman authorities that he recant his Christian faith. I am sure George held on to the hope promised in the resurrection, that his blood spilt would not be wasted. And this story from John's Gospel, when Jesus shows those marvelous wounds, he offers us the message that these offerings of sacrificial love poured out for a greater purpose, are never wasted. They need not be hidden away and forgotten. In fact, these are the very marks that inspire others to embrace the faith, to become followers. And these are not just stories from the 4th century. I think of the story of my mother dying of cancer at the age of 53, with children as young as 11 still under her care. How her faith, how her assurance that she would know the joy of resurrection, the company of the risen one, how that faith gave us strength to get through an incredibly difficult time. It's that kind of promise held in the resurrection for people of faith that I held on to so tightly when I asked the good people of Grace Church to consider the possibility of making the sacrifice of leaving their beloved building. The hope of the resurrection gave me hope that that sacrifice would bring joy and glory to God, make a difference in the world, make a difference for those who made that difficult choice. And I'm so delighted that we already are seeing first fruits of those sacrifices. First, by the warm welcome that we received by our brothers and sisters in faith of St. George's and St. James. How they've cared for us. And on Maundy Thursday, because my roles and responsibilities have shifted from caring for a big building and all the administrative and other duties of being a rector. Now in my new capacity as director of social justice and outreach, I had the time to invite people from our breakfast program, from Out of the Cold, to join us for Maundy Thursday for that dinner. And I was moved to tears to see so many come up to worship with us that night. The sacrifice that was made by the people of Grace Church and myself in moving from a place of comfort and taking a risk, already tasting some of the joys that come from that. These are big examples. But there are little ways to grow our faith, to invite the Spirit of the Risen One to soften our hearts and let go of old grudges. So many of us carry pains from so much of our lives. Pains that the Risen One carried to the cross for us. And through the power of his resurrection, can allow us as his followers to let go of them. That we might be more fully alive, filled with his grace, his love, his power. That we, doubters, people with questions, people with failed plans like Thomas, can actually become missionaries, sharing this good news like Thomas did to the people of India. The story of the resurrection is very much our story, very much still alive. Let us give thanks to God for this wonderful and powerful act. And let us ask God to bless us to be yet more evidence of Jesus' resurrection. Amen.